there are some rules about what a company has to do if they lose your data. There are very few rules about what a company has to do when they use your data.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. Okay, folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in this week. So this week we have Rasa's daddy. Okay, who the heck is that? Well, Rasa is a friend of my daughter's, and her dad, Jeremy Smith, just wrote a super interesting book. Jeremy is a Missoula resident and graduate of the University of Montana's Masters of Fine Arts program. His writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Discover, and the New York Times. In his recently released book, Breaking and Entering, The Extraordinary Story of a Hacker Called Alien, is a fascinating and deeply reported narrative account of the life of Sherry Davidoff, another Missoula resident and founder CEO of LMG Security, a firm dedicated to, what else? Cybersecurity. Jeremy's book is as riveting as it is informative. I enjoyed reading it and I enjoyed talking to him all about it, and I hope you enjoy our conversation right now. Okay, so we're here today with Jeremy Smith. Jeremy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, full disclosure, this is take two with Jeremy, and it was entirely my fault. Although I probably could have released that episode because I did everything right except I didn't activate my mic. Your mic was working great, and maybe that would have been a better podcast to just put your audio out there and cut myself out completely.
The monologue, the unintentional monologue.
Exactly.
You got hacked.
There we go. I got hacked, so we'll get to that. So, Jeremy, you have this new book out, Breaking and Entering, The Extraordinary Story of a Hacker Called Alien. The book came out in January, if I'm correct.
That's right. Brand new.
How's it been doing?
Great. Went to New York and Boston and San Francisco and Seattle and Missoula and Chicago. So I think those are like the 5 most important
Seems like
cities.
You covered it.
Yeah,
it's like you're one of the Democratic candidates for office, right?
There you go.
So before we get into the book, you also got to talk at some pretty cool places on that trip. You did talk at Google, is that right?
Yeah, I gave a talk at a Google office in Bellevue, Washington. I was able to get snuck into Apple and talk to some folks there.
How do you sneak into Apple? Is that like part of the shtick with hacking?
Well, all the walls are glass. So
Right.
you just sort of, act like you're on the inside and no one can tell what the inside and the outside is. It's
Sure.
California anyway. So people just sort of migrated to me and I sort of slipped in when they came back, and all of a sudden I was in a conference room surrounded by interested, readers or audience members at least.
Awesome. Well, okay. Tell us about this book. It's about hacking. You are, I don't know how you classify yourself as a writer, investigative journalist, investigative storyteller. How would you sort of categorize your writing?
I like that investigative storyteller one.
Okay.
I write nonfiction narratives, which is a fancy way of saying true stories.
Mm-hmm.
My niche within that is profiles, and I usually look for a topic where I can explore a person and follow their story, and at the same time get into a whole field of knowledge or experience or industry and kind of cover that too.
Yeah, and this is your third book.
Yeah.
You've got Growing a Garden City and Epic Measures, both similar in that respect. They follow sort of a central character but illuminate a bigger issue that we should all be thinking about. The central issue in this current book, Breaking and Entering, is hacking. But hacking is what I've learned through reading the book is not what I thought it was. And in fact, it goes back much further than computers. So tell us maybe about the history of this word and what it means and kind of why you found it interesting.
Sure. So the book follows the true story of a female hacker whose hacker handle is Alien.
Mm-hmm.
And when she's a freshman at MIT, she discovers this tradition of hacking at MIT that's over 100 years old that
and
predates
this is
computers.
Like early 90s. She's a student at MIT or late 80s?
Late 90s, actually.
Late 90s, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
1998, I want to say, is her freshman year.
Okay.
And meanwhile, there's a tradition of hacking that dates to the early 1900s. And it refers to physical exploration of building spaces and other kind of construction. So it could be going on a ledge or a rooftop or through a steam tunnel or up an elevator shaft or even on top of the great domes at MIT. and you pull a hack when that leads to an elaborate, ingenious prank that everyone can see. And there's this great tradition of those at MIT.
Yeah.
But you go hacking when you're just sort of exploring for its own sake. And students in that subculture do that kind of day in, day out, sort of pushing the limits of where they can go and how much they can discover that even a building zone designers might not have known about.
So there's these kind of, in the book, you paint such a rich picture of aliens' experiences. I mean, they are pushing the boundaries of, well past what would be considered safe. I mean, they're taking enormous risks, whether it's scaling an elevator shaft or just simply going into the unknown of these the basements upon basements of buildings. And yeah, I mean, it's not a safe endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most famous hacks at MIT was the police car on the dome hack.
Yeah.
And so, as an example, there's a couple great domes at MIT that are sort of like the Pantheon in Rome. And to get a police car with flashing lights and I think even a box of Dunkin' Donuts on top of the dome was one of the great feats of student pranking, that you can imagine across the United States or around the world.
And it's also like they never reveal the methods, right? That's
exactly.
Sort of
and they don't get permission. They don't reveal the methods. But I hadn't thought, so I knew about that. I knew about other hacks like getting a complete living room set, including like a lounge chair and a billiards table and a liquor cabinet and like a cat sitting on a dresser upside down opposite the arch, opposite the MIT Media Lab.
Sure.
Or turning the tallest building on campus into a playable Tetris game. So I knew about some of those hacks, but I hadn't thought about the foundational skills needed to pull it off. You need to be able to sneak past guards. You need to be able to pick locks. You need to be able to walk along ledges. You need to be able to carry 50-pound backpacks. You need to be able to do this in the dark. You need to be able to assemble a police car with a small group of friends and then get down again, all without being discovered. So that's not something you just decide to do after dinner one night. That's something that requires a huge amount of planning and also just sort of physical skills and preliminary explorations.
Yeah, and a piece of that you mentioned there with a group of friends. I mean, it's not just independent operators here. I mean, some of it is that way, but yeah, I mean, this is a cohesive team of people that it takes to pull off some of these things.
Yeah, it's a very small but active subculture, and it was concentrated at the time on a particular hall in a particular building called Fifth East on the MIT campus, which has this sort of tradition. They call it roof and tunnel hacking, which is you're trying to get onto roofs, you're trying to get through tunnels. And they pull these hacks, but that's much more rare. Often they're just going off for their own sake. They even have like Sharpies where they do what they call sign-ins, which are kind of like graffiti, but instead of it being seen by the public, part of the ethos is you would only ever sign in a place that another hacker could see. If a member of the public could see it, it's not worth signing in.
Right.
So it'd be the top of a crevice, of an elevator shaft, or it'd be sort of electrical utility room in between two buildings that had been sort of tombed over, as they call it, in sort of remodeling.
Yeah,
so,
probably the more obscure, difficult a place to put your sign in. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, exactly.
The better.
Right.
So tell us about Alien's experience in this world and kind of how it shaped her experience. I mean, you dedicate a lot of the book to it, and it's so. I think it's sort of time so well spent because you develop such a rich portrait of who this woman is.
Yeah, I mean, that is the first quarter of the book,
Yeah.
and it's what hacking means to her when she gets there. She's not, immersed in computer culture. She's not, sort of internet native in the way, kids are today. And even compared to other MIT students, that's not her traditional interest or background.
Right.
She kind of, in a way, almost applied to MIT on a dare, you could say, by her parents, and wrote a kind of creative, wildly imaginative essay that got her to MIT. And when she was there, she was like, wow, these people are much more technical than I am. But she didn't let that intimidate her. She just plunged in. And so she starts in this physical hacking world that bleeds into what we call, loosely in the book, brain hacking. There are people that are sort of pushing the limits of their minds with drugs and other forms of exploration. You got some world-class chemists at MIT, including in the undergraduates. And that moves to hacking as we better understand it today, computer security or computer insecurity, She's on the first MIT network security team. She goes to Los Alamos National Laboratory. Right. She gets her computer skills beefed up considerably there. She ends up working at a major hospital in Boston, doing computer security for them, trying to keep the networks and the equipment safe. And then she gets a job essentially breaking and entering. She gets hired by a group of penetration testers, which are hackers that companies hire to try to test their security by breaking into them.
Right, come rob my bank.
Exactly.
Which is kind of the premise under which you that was your initial entry point into this story. We can maybe pull back and tell us why how you entered into this particular project.
Sure. So I didn't set out to write a book about hackers and hacking and just look for the person in a hoodie who's on the dark web.
Yeah.
Instead, I went to pick my daughter up from preschool. And she was there. She was playing with another little girl who was new to her class. And the mom and I started talking. She said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a writer." I talked about some of my projects for a while. And then I turned and said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, tomorrow morning I have to break into a bank."
Right.
And I realized this is the interesting person in this conversation.
Yeah,
it's time for me to stop talking and start asking follow-up questions. And that's kind of what I did for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah. I mean, at what point did you know, like, this is going to be the next project?
It wasn't for close to a year.
Okay.
It was more play dates and get-togethers and kind of casual conversations. And I got the stories kind of piece by piece. And I think that slow build, sort of starting as friends or at least parents of very young friends, allowed us to be more comfortable with each other, have an easier rapport. And she was in fact thinking about writing a book and did write a book that's coming out soon, but her book was much more technical. And she was asking my advice on sort of outlining it at the very beginning. And I said, "This is a great topic. I think you'll have a huge business audience for it, but you should write a general book about your adventures. They're
her
amazing."
story's amazing.
And she said, "Well, I would never write about myself." And I said, "Well, could I?"
Sure.
And she kind of gave me some additional homework and reporting assignments, like going to a hacker convention in Vegas, going to MIT, having to scramble on the dome myself, stuff like that. And when I came back, she said, "All right, let's give it a try and we'll see if it works."
Sure. And I suppose that whole process is, building trust and authenticity. And and the interesting piece of that is the whole time you're reporting the book, including publication, she is only known by Alien.
Yeah. I mean, it was important to her it was funny. It was important to her for the story to be as truthful as possible. And for that, she felt it was necessary to protect the clients that she had and certain family members, right?
Sure.
And friends. And so she said, "I want this to be the unvarnished truth, warts and all, scars and all. But I also, for that to happen, I need you to change identifying details. So names, some physical locations, a few dates slightly. But other than that, it's basically true." I mean, someone asked me, "Well, was it really a guy?" And I was like, no, this is 99.9% exactly what happened. I just had to change some names.
Yeah.
There's nothing made up in that sense. And so, up to publication, that was a concern, and some of it still is, but she decided to kind of own it a bit more afterward, and even ended up on the Today Show. So that was kind of cool.
Sherry Davidoff, owner and founder of LMG Security, and we'll get to her firm here in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I had met Sherry and heard all about her and have students working at her company. And so it never occurred to me, Jeremy, that this was the person who was Alien. Yet now that I know, it makes total sense.
Well, good. I guess I did my job on both ends. I honored my obligations to her and to the reader.
Absolutely. So let's kind of fast forward to Alien, Sherry's work now.
Sure.
At LMG, and kind of this notion of what hacking and cybersecurity are. I've heard you talk about what hacking is and isn't. What is it? What do people think it is, and then what is it really in your assessment?
Wow, what do people think it is? I guess they think it's a teenager in a hoodie or a faceless foreign agent.
So there's misconceptions about the people doing it. Yeah. Let's maybe start there.
Yeah. And so, if you do a image search for hacker, you literally get no faces. You just get shadowed figures in hoodies, hundreds and hundreds of hits long.
Green lighting
I showed, a picture of the Google image search for hacker when I was at Google. And, they had to kind of laugh because it was like, you're supposed to be the best search engine in the world, and you literally don't even have a face
Right.
on this thing that's so important to our society, our economy, our culture, our politics today. And hacking in a similar way has grown up. Even when we have a face to hacking, it's stuck 40, 30 years old. It's Matthew Broderick in War Games. It's Angelina Jolie in Hackers. And I had this opportunity in this book to follow a hacker, but also a community of hackers and an industry of hacking as it grows up over time.
Sure.
And so it has grown up. It has become extremely professionalized. And that's on both ends of the equation, what we call white hat hackers, hackers that are the good guys and girls who are here to protect us, and black hat hackers, which are the sort of adversaries or criminals, and gray hat, which are sort of people who move between both worlds. And it was exciting to, get to share some of what that looks like behind the scenes, because so few people even have a sense that anyone who's a hacker could be a good guy, much less a person or an adult or the mom, with the kid next to you on the playground.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of how the industry has grown up and matured. It sort of didn't exist when she entered it 15 years ago, and now it's, I think, about $140, $150 billion industry, which also has a view into every other aspect of our society because of the work, breaking into things and assessing other break-ins and trying to protect and improve security.
I think most people sort of think about it just in terms of like, oh yeah, somebody hacked my Facebook account or my Instagram and they're posting pictures or following porn stars or just doing something that's generally annoying. Or they've stolen my identity and are running up credit card charges or, things like that at the personal level. But that's probably not the bulk of the hacks out there. And it's probably a decades old conception of where it's at.
Well, I mean, one concept she shared with me is if something is valuable to you, it's valuable to someone else.
Pretty
It
straightforward.
can be sold on the black market
Yeah.
in that respect. And some things can't be sort of changed and given a new one. It's hard to change your social security number, but forget it. She says those are already all taken. They've been stolen 100 times.
Wow.
But your credit card, hey, you can cancel, get a new one.
Yep.
Now, what about things like your medical history?
Mm-hmm.
You can't cancel your medical history and get a new one. So that's where, intimate details of our lives are being violated, processed, sold, and other aspects of our lives are being marketed or, used to manipulate us or other people.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I don't want to make accusations of corporations being gray hats, but if you think, you mentioned medical history. Mm-hmm. So it's one thing to hack into a hospital or a medical office, but there's also, if you look at Google, Facebook, whoever, they're creating these huge profiles of us, and they could be developing algorithms to make predictions about our health and then market us health products. And so it's not just it's not as simple as breaking into a bank. There's a lot of intermediaries that hold a ton of data about us that have value.
Yeah, another thing she says all the time is, there are some rules about what a company has to do if they lose your data. There are very few rules about what a company has to do when they use your data.
Okay.
So
explain the difference.
Well, if someone has records about you and they get breached, then they're supposed to tell you if there's a certain level of sensitivity, financial or medical. If someone is marketing to you, selling consumer habits, selling their guess of your political preferences, selling where you live, where you vote, if you're married or not, that's not information that we're privy. That exchange of information we're not privy to. It might not even be accurate, and that gets dangerous too. But the sort of marketing and manipulation of us, this is kind of in more your topic area.
Absolutely.
Here at the
here
at the B School, but that's happening too. I think, the bread and butter of the work she and her company do are, one, as I said, they get hired to test security. They get hired to try to break into places and see how they can be broken into in a variety of ways. That could be in person. There's scenes in the book where, she talks and walks her way into a corporate office or a bank vault or any other kind of setting. That could be remote. It could be, classic kind of someone with a laptop at a coffee shop. How far can they get into? There's a scene in the book where she gets into an airline reservation system that way. And that could be any other more specialized thing. I mean, I talk to hackers who specialize in lockpicking or elevator hacking or a particular kind of software operating system, or car hackers or Internet of Things hackers. And she's got a lot of those, in some sense on her staff.
A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hi, this is Mike Morelli, Director of the Entertainment Management Program at the University of Montana, and you are listening to A New Angle.
At the same time, how do you catch someone or recover if you've been breached yourself? And in theory, it takes a thief to catch a thief.
Yeah.
Often they're the ones who get hired to come in and figure out what happened, what was taken, how to recover, and how to prevent it from happening again. They also do things like digital hostage negotiations. Say you get hit by, our current big menace, ransomware, where your data isn't even stolen, it's just encrypted and locked up in a way that you can't access it yourself. And to get the key from the criminal,
pause that.
You got to negotiate.
I don't think people understand that happens. Data is stolen, gets encrypted and housed somewhere else, or you just can't get to your data?
Well, no, this is the brilliance. You don't have to steal the data. They just, the software can encrypt the data on your computer.
Okay.
So it's not even lost. It's just unusable to you.
And then you have to pay a ransom to unlock it.
Yeah, you just have, and so they give you a piece of information that's essentially the key to unlock it. So they don't have to do big transfers. It can be a pretty minor thing. And by the time you realize it, you've lost access to your data. It's happened infamously at a series of hospital systems in Los Angeles, a bunch of school systems, but many other law firms and local businesses. I promise you in Missoula and in many other places as well. I think there's a stigma to being hacked, so people don't always report it. It is often easier to try to pay the fee, but at the same time, how do you do that, right? If someone says, you need to give me $5,000 in Bitcoin in the next 24 hours.
I wouldn't even know where to start.
Exactly. So you might call your insurer, who might connect you quickly with Sherry and her team.
Yep.
And they're trying to, A, can we get this out without paying this fee? B, if we need to, how do we negotiate? And then C, if we're negotiating and we are going to move forward with payment, okay, let's get your Bitcoin wallet together. Or
so they
we'll
do actual negotiations.
Oh, all the time.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny. I was talking to the Today Show producer who was coming in to film them, and she said, can you record when this happens? And Sherry was just like, this happens almost every day.
It's just routine.
Yeah, this is a typical day in the office. Is breaking into a bank, doing a Bitcoin negotiation, testing the limits of, a defense manufacturer, and it's all happening in downtown Missoula, at least as a base.
Wow. It kind of makes me think about, as you've gotten to know this industry and this practice, I suppose at every point in history we've thought that technology is moving faster than it should or could or whatever we want to, however we want to describe it. But in this instance, I mean, I think about, a few months back when, the leaders of a lot of the big tech firms went to Congress, and you could just see that the members of Congress were kind of out of their depth as to what questions to be asking. And then we have this dynamic of something bad happens, whether it's in the financial markets or in the tech space, and the good guys and the bad guys kind of becomes unclear who's who, and sometimes the bad guys get hired as good guys to regulate the bad guys. They used to be those gray hats, as maybe you called them. You thought about that tension in these types of situations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the historical analogies I use is to the field of surgery.
Okay.
Like 300, 400, 500 years ago, surgeons were often considered criminals. They were literally body snatchers in some cases. And people thought they were stealing bodies or killing people to do experiments on them. And sometimes those accusations were true.
Sure.
There wasn't a formal system of medical education, and what was happening in the dark, not in the light. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that system has changed. It has become professionalized. It has been brought, into the sunshine, and I think we all benefit. And so do surgeons, of course. They have a different kind of status and prestige and level of access and education. And what my hope is that hackers will experience that similar kind of transition, not because it's not cool to have a kind of shadowy black hat image, but because we need them. We need their help, and we need them to know that we recognize them and them to recognize us, and to have that kind of face-to-face exchange. Because they're the ones who understand this system and these systems that we've built our entire society on. I mean, I think there's an irony I often sort of cite where hackers were always playing on the internet. It was a small playground where people were playing with network computers and doing different kind of pranks and investigations and testing the limits. We then moved our entire society, our economy, our culture, our businesses, our social life onto the internet, onto their playground.
Yeah,
so in a
here's
weird
this
way,
great thing. Let's do it.
In a weird way, we invaded their world as much as they've invaded ours. And I think we're all kind of freaking out at that intersection. And I think we have a lot to learn if we can learn to listen to each other.
We get so attracted to shiny objects and don't learn from our historical mistakes. I mean, these things are sort of obvious as you say them, but we still repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And this hacking space seems to be another one of those.
Well, I don't know if it's a mistake as much as a vulnerability.
Yeah, blind spots to risk, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it is really attractive. I mean, she talks about this. She says, online banking, obviously that's risky. Why would you have people you don't see do things remotely with credentials that are really hard to verify? But it's massively more convenient.
Super easy, yeah.
It's not about having no risk. It's about facing risk and sort of assessing it frankly, and then seeing what choices you can live with and what you can't live without. I mean, she takes a ton of risks in the book, both physical risks and career risks and family and interpersonal risks. So that's part of her personality. She's not against risk-taking, but she is for seeing it for what it is, seeing it clearly, and trying to maximize the benefits. Most hackers are into a lot of technology, but they're also savvy enough to know that there's always going to be unintended uses that the designers hadn't envisioned. And the only way to achieve true security is by testing it.
And gosh, thinking about risk, how has your relationship to risk changed through the course of this reporting project?
I think in my physical life, if you will, day to day, what I'm willing to brave and do with my body, it's maybe I've gotten riskier.
Good.
In the sense of the research for the book. I went to a hacker convention in Vegas, and that took me to a kind of DIY shooting range in the desert where there were drone-driven skeets and people firing in their own homemade cannons. And, things like that even coming from Montana was a little bit beyond the pale for me. I went to Los Alamos National Laboratory, amazing scientific site, but also huge military research site, armed guards, very nervous that I was going to do the wrong thing and, be brought in for questioning or worse. I also had to, have someone take me on a motorcycle ride to sort of recreate some of her adventures there. And probably most perilous of all, do some of the MIT hacking just to kind of be able to walk in those footsteps.
And how did you get into that crew? Like, Alien just make a couple calls and
she made a couple
say,
calls.
Hey, take this guy around with you?
Yeah, or, you get introduced to someone who introduces you to someone else. You go to a hacker convention with 20,000 people, even if 10,000 don't want to talk to anybody, that's still a pretty wide pool of people who are, open to maybe entertaining someone if he can hang.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Like, it's got to be just a different sort of reporting process for you, trying to sort of gain trust and access to this group of folks.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most important thing was never to try to blend in. I always tried to blend out. So, I have shorts. I have black T-shirts. I did not wear those to the hacker convention. I wore khakis. I wore a buttoned-up shirt because I wanted to say, hey, I'm a writer. I wanted to signal that immediately and then say it, quickly and be understood that way. I never wanted a hacker to think I was trying to fool them or cross them or get over. They don't like fakery, and I don't like fakery. So I just thought, let me be as authentic as I can and, even err on the side of being stodgier than I might otherwise be in my own casual life.
Yeah.
I thought of Tom Wolfe, dressing in a white suit to interview the Hells Angels. And I thought, okay, I don't have to go quite that far in either direction, but, that's a good model.
Yeah, the spirit is there. So you maybe have become a little bit more daring with physical risk. How about other types of risk?
I think on the computer stuff, I've become much more conservative.
Yeah, I would imagine.
We talked about, how ransomware encrypts your own data so you can't read it yourself. that's encouraged me, on the other hand, to do things like have encrypted email. So when I communicate with people, even if those messages get stolen or breached, whoever stole them can't read them other than the sort of subject line. I mean, that's the sort of promise of encryption. Or encrypt my hard drive. So if the computer is stolen and someone takes out the hard drive, then, it's not readable. I mean, Alien and her team, sometimes, when they're traveling, they lock their hard drives in safes overnight. They're at that level of sort of paranoia. I'm not quite there, but I'm encrypting it, right? And, a variety of other precautions. I list them kind of at the end of the book that just sort of, hopefully make me a little bit savvier and, if not free from hacking, not low-hanging fruit that I might have been before.
How do these companies compete against each other? Do they hack each other as part of their sort of competitive positioning process?
Well, it's a new field, right? And so, I think it's a little bit of Scandal, a little bit of Silicon Valley. And I mean that in sort of the TV show references
For sure.
So like tech, there's a lot of creative disruption, a lot of, poaching, friendly rivalry. I mean, Sherry refers to people as frenemies often. Yeah. And that could be your client. That could be a competitor. That could be your old boss. That could be your former employee. And I think people do have a lot to gain from each other as well as to lose. So I think in general, it's a friendly competition, but it's also very fierce. I mean, there's how she got her first job in that sort of penetration testing field is she won what they call a capture the flag contest, which is you're sort of hacking your sort of opponents' teams to try to get things on their computer. They're trying to hack things to get them on yours. These are extremely common at any kind of hacking conference or convention. They love games. They love these kind of adversarial, pursuits. And it is, though, in the spirit of learning and fun, and then people hopefully share and teach each other too.
So as you've been traveling around sort of promoting the book and speaking to interested constituents, have there been any themes with the feedback or surprises, or responses to the work that were unanticipated?
I think, of course, people are surprised that a hacker can be a woman. They are surprised that a hacker can be a mother. They're surprised that a hacker can be a grown-up.
Yep.
And those are kind of obvious in retrospect, but until you get your first example, if you've never seen a face, you've never seen that example, it can challenge your stereotype. I think the other thing is that they're surprised that hacking can be so much broader than just someone typing at a keyboard. This idea of lockpicking or building hacking or social engineering, which is, hacking human beings by manipulating them with just your words.
Yeah. To
kind of get into spaces or get them to open their doors for you. And that's at the basis of the kind of phishing emails or the fake, scam phone calls that we, get it all the time. But a lot of those are the basis for some of the biggest data breaches we have today.
So, Jeremy, I'd like to pivot a little bit and speak more about kind of your writing background style and kind of where you're at next. So you did your undergraduate work at Harvard. You did your Master's of Fine Arts here in the creative writing program.
That's right.
Is that right? And you've chosen to make your home Missoula. Why have you found Missoula to be the place for you and your family?
Well, Missoula is great for a lot of reasons. First of all, I'm surrounded by really smart people who are smart about things I'm not smart about. My kind of areas of expertise, if you will, are like words and numbers. I often like to say, I'm good at everything that doesn't exist. And in Missoula, there are people who are really good at things that exist, whether that's wildlife, farming, beer,
coffee,
rivers, mountains, the stars, so I, have learned so much in these 15 plus years I've been here. And there's just always people that I could bump into and say, wow, you're a master morel mushroom hunter. Can I follow you around? Wow, you are tracking wild buffalo. Can I follow you around? And wow, you're starting this network of community farms and gardens. Can I follow you around? And so I love that, chances are there's going to be someone I haven't met with a really interesting story to learn from, whether they're a topic of a writing assignment or just someone to have a cool conversation and learn from. The other thing is, of course, it's a great place to kind of make your life into a permanent writing retreat.
Right.
So, I can hike up a mountain every day at lunch, right? I can drop in a river for a little bit on a paddleboard. I can go cross-country skiing around the park outside my house. And these are great ways to kind of be rejuvenated, refresh my mind, and still be connected to people. And there's good food, and it's a hard place financially to get ahead, but it's fairly easy, or has been, to get by. So, I could live on very little money, and that was the plan.
Yeah, talk us through that a little bit if you don't mind. I mean,
Sure.
so many, I shouldn't say so many, but many people here in Missoula have, that was kind of one of the big themes of this podcast. You got to be creative to kind of put together a portfolio of things that sort of roll up into a job that allows you to sustain the life you want. And there's a lot of different iterations of that here. As a writer, what's that process like? I mean, you get paid by the book or the article or whatever. How do you manage keeping it afloat?
Yeah. So in the past, it was to live extremely lightly. It was like high four figures was high.
Sure.
So it was like, I remember emailing someone several years into being in Missoula and being like, I'm making about $9,000 a year right now, and if I made like 12, I'd be pretty set. And she was trying to like be a writer in New York.
Oh,
and
geez.
so that was. She responded with incredulity, and but that's let me have a long apprentice stage. I'll just put it kindly there. And frankly, when I was making $10,000 a year from writing, that was and still is pretty much more than almost anybody I knew who was making money from writing.
Sure.
That's just it's a great way to learn, explore, have a good life. But it's the artist's life. It's just like being a painter or a sculptor. It's not like being a internet entrepreneur or something like that. There could be an upside, I guess, if something becomes a bestseller, it gets turned into a movie or something. But, even writing articles for pretty prestigious publications, it just takes a while. And even if they pay, as much as $2 a word,
Yep.
You might be spending a couple months to make $6,000, which at that time was amazing. That was something I could live on for a year, if I did that. So, I've had the good fortune to have my last two books be of sufficient potential public interest that the publishers gave, larger advances. And again, these are, on a writer's scale. So I'm making, much more money than I was before,
Sure.
or almost any other writer that I knew, but much less than like almost anyone with an actual job.
But then when you get an advance, then you kind of become, in many ways, you're the owner of a small business, which is yourself. You're the CEO of yourself. So you get this advance, and then you have to decide the allocation of budget to fund these trips to conferences, to MIT, to...
Sure, right. You don't get expenses paid.
Yeah.
And it's often, the advance itself is often divided into sort of quarters. In other words, you might get a quarter on signing, a quarter on delivery, a quarter on publication, and a quarter on paperback publication.
Sure.
That would be not atypical. But that does mean that I might get paid once and not get paid again for two years.
Yeah.
And so, it becomes a big pacing thing. And again, having those sort of pre-advance appetites and lifestyle. I spend money pretty freely on books and food. And those are kind of my expenses. I don't even have a car. I had a canoe, before we even had a shared car between me and my wife. And so that's kind of, the basis I use. And hopefully, it's worked out so far. Again, it's not a great way to get ahead, but I've been fortunate enough to be here long enough and get to do this. I guess every time I get to do it again, I feel like, wow, I got to do this again. And I don't take it for granted. I don't assume I'll get to do it again,
right.
Even now. And so I've, maybe I will, and maybe I'll bump into something else, but that I've been, able to fool them this long is good. And hopefully I'll get to a point. I figure if I can do it till I'm 50, I'll have made myself unfit for any actual employment. If you haven't had a job before you're 50, who would hire you? So hopefully that'll be my way in or way out.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good pitch.
Thanks.
Right. And so speaking of doing it again, like where are you at in that process? I know that's a dangerous question as writers, is like, what's the next project? But
I am going to a bar after this recording, and I'm hoping I'm going to.
And I'm not invited?
You're invited. It's a PTA fundraiser, and I know our kids are at the same school. So
our goals align there.
So Yeah, hopefully I'll just bump into somebody. That's it's a crazy thing where you're telling true stories and they're other people's true stories. If I keep that up, that just means I got to bump into somebody, be open, and have one thing lead to another. They don't have to be in Missoula. That hasn't always been my topic,
Sure.
but you got to be open. Or I generate a project by doing my own. I'm the experimenter. I'm the subject in some way. Whatever form that takes, or it's more reported based on a topic, which is another whole genre of nonfiction books. I say, okay, I want to look at the future of telecommunications, or I want to look at immigration in this country, and I kind of find the topics from there. But so far, I've always found the people first.
Yeah, that's an interesting process question. I mean, I think of comparing people to other writers is always fraught. But when I read your work, I think of Michael Lewis a little bit. Like he illuminates important issues through characters, and your stories sort of, not stories, but your books sort of do the same thing. You said you found the people first, but how does it work? Do you find the people? Do you find the issue? What's most interesting? I'm sure it's all of it, but
well, there's this sort of not paradox, but sort of dual existence where when I'm in a project, I go deeper and deeper, and I call it kind of submarining, and I'm hiding from the world. I'm getting more and more into it. I'm not even reading outside topics as much. I'm not talking to people. My shaving and bathing routines become ever more strained. I'm not a pleasant person to hang out with necessarily because I'm not really present.
These just seem like such common stereotypes for writers.
There you go. And when I'm done with a book, then I have to do the opposite. I have to be totally open. And, luckily that's, my hopeful little default. I'm interested in people. I want to hear their stories. And so just kind of saying, hey, what do you do? Or,
Sure.
what are you thinking about? Or that's a cool poster. Let me go to that event and see what I hear. And, there's a million things that I could pursue or even think of pursuing, for every one or two I actually do. And then those I do, only a teeny number pan out into something that, I can sell or package, or the timing's right, or the cooperation or access is right. So it's a funny kind of winnowing. I'm a kind of talent scout for myself.
I like that. Talent scout for yourself. We should all be that.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Why not?
So in closing here, Jeremy, give us 3 book recommendations.
Ooh.
What are you reading right now that you'd recommend to others?
I just read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, novel. Super interesting, very hot book right now. Sort of female friendships, fluid sexuality, betrayals. Awesome. I read another novel, but this almost felt like nonfiction reportage, called The Heart a couple of years ago. It was translated from the French, and it follows a heart in a human being.
Oh, wow.
As it starts with like a kid who's going surfing, and something bad happens, and it ends up being a potential transplant, sort of following the heart from sort of start to finish. Amazing. And
Cool.
I think deeply reported. You mentioned Michael Lewis, huge fan of anything he does, anything John McPhee does, some of my kind of role models in the nonfiction side. But I've been reading lots of little books too. My friend Keisha Schlegel has a series of literary essays called Fear Icons, and they're based on a series of people or objects or topics that she or others of us are afraid of, and she kind of riffs on them, whether it's our current president or Liberace or Dolly Parton aging, or her kids getting sick or anything like that. And they're just short, but they're super sharp and beautiful. So I recommend that on the kind of nonfiction side.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for doing this a second time. I appreciate that. And most of all, thanks for telling these great stories and exposing this unbelievably interesting world to all of us. Where can people find the book? Here in town.
Anywhere, everywhere books are sold. Fact and Fiction was my launch bookseller, and so I know they've got a bunch of signed ones, but I'm sure they've got them at the other bookstores in town too.
Super. I encourage everybody to check it out. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Okay, check out Jeremy's book, Breaking and Entering, wherever you buy your books. And coming up next week, we have Suzanne Miller, creator of Days at Dunrovin, an amazing and unlikely social media venture happening on the banks of the Bitterroot River. Learn all about it next week. Thanks for listening to New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, part of the Michelle and Lauren Hansen Media Lab at the University of Montana College of Business. Remember that this podcast was supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you'd ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Executive producer, Stefan Borsum. Producer, Aidan Morton. And interns, Aspen Runkle, Max Gibson, and Ellie Hanasek. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot. See you next time.